Welcome to the Sports Talk Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Dwayne. I want to thank you for joining me. Today, we have lots to cover, particularly things associated with association football, soccer, real football, whatever you want to call it. We have lots to cover there. So I want to start off with probably the most controversial call since the introduction of the VAR. So as many of you know, VAR is a team of offside referees who adjudicate for a number of things like offside, violent conduct, you name it. However, in the English Premier League, there was a big matchup between Liverpool and Tottenham Hotspur. And we won't get into the intricacies of the game. In the end, Liverpool lost. Having been down by 10. In the end, Liverpool lost, having lost two men to a red card. But that's not the point of what I want to discuss. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the unfortunate incident of Lis Diaz and his goal being called offside when it should not have been. And so let's get into it, because a number of developments have occurred since this happened last Sunday. And it's important that we unpack some of this and get a real sense of what's going on here. I think if I had to give you the cheat story here or the quick answer, I don't think it has anything to do with VAR, the technology, but mostly this is about human error. And in fact, at this moment in time, the PGMOL, which manages the state of the English game when it comes to officiating, they have also accepted some responsibility. There's been transcripts released. In fact, the audio of the decision-making process within VAR and the communications back to the on-field referees, all of that has been released. And so there's some transparency there. Webb, who is in charge of all the referees and in particularly VAR and so on in the United Kingdom for the Premier League, he has also made some statements. He's also under some pressure somewhat, but as we break it down, we'll get a sense of what's going on there. So, as you know, if you saw the match or if you've been following things, VAR, when Diaz scores that goal, it's not clear he was onside or offside. It looks like he was onside, at least when you think about it from just from the television cameras, but television cameras are not always the best thing to adjudicate this stuff. But importantly, what had happened was the assistant referee raised this flag to indicate that the goal was offside. And no matter what happens, whether it's offside or not, anytime a ball goes into the back of the net, VAR will check it. And so that's one of the primary functions of VAR. And in the process, they go through the check process, and in which, in many ways, this is very farcical, because in the end, they come back with a decision agreeing with the on-field decision, which was an offside goal, but they actually realized that the goal was onside. So Darren, England, who was in charge of the VAR room, he had a major blunder. England and his assistant in the VAR room, Darren Cook, was there. And they, for some reason, they thought that what they were adjudicating was whether or not the goal was good, in the sense that it's a legitimate goal and their response to the VAR is, yes, it's a goal, because they did not realize that the on-field referee, the assistant referee in particular, raised this flag for an offside. And so that's a big big mistake there. It points to a lot of issues as it pertains to communication. And if you listen to, I urge you, after you finish watching this podcast, go take a look at that clip. They've released the clip, you'll hear all of that stuff. And, the PGMOL, they acknowledge what they're saying is a significant human error, right? And, VAR failed to intervene and the goal should have been awarded. This is the kind of language that they're putting out at this moment in time, which I suspect if you're a Liverpool fan, you're mightily upset, because had you gone on to win that game, you would have been on top of the league. Obviously, we can't know what would have happened subsequently. We recognize they went down to two men, but went down by two men rather. But you never know what kind of a structure you would put in place in terms of scoring that goal and what that would have done for their resolve. And in a way, Liverpool has been on this amazing unbeaten run for a while, and now that's all gone, but artificially gone in a sense. Obviously, it will be recorded as being gone, but yeah, this is the problem here for them. And I am very upset about this in particular because this shouldn't happen at all in the game. When you think about the Professional Games Match Officials Limited, these professionals are responsible for refereeing the English game. And we're not talking about ordinary people. We're talking about extremely talented individuals who've been trained. And this kind of mistake is not something that should be making. I know a lot of people have issues with VAR. I don't have any issue with VAR, and I'll tell you why, at least from a technological standpoint, for adjudicating things like offside. Because in a way, that's a binary type of thing. You're either offside or not. Now, I'll admit, and I've done this in other videos before, and you should check out my video on semi-automated offside technology, which I'll get to in a second as well. The cameras are so sophisticated now that they could technically figure out a toenail or less, the difference if you're offside or not. And I can appreciate if somebody came here and they want to argue about what constitutes an appreciable advantage for a player, right? But as long as we've recognized that offside should be, as long as we've created the parameters for what offside is, which has changed over time as well, but as long as you have that, then the system is in place to say that either the player is offside or they're not. This is not trying to get into the dynamics of whether we should escalate something to endangering a player or reckless tackles. Sometimes those things are also clear-cut, but other times they lend themselves for a level of subjectivity. And this is not what's happening here, right? What's happening here is that the guys made a significant error. And why? Like, how could they have a process like this failing, right? So at the moment, the PGMOL has acknowledged that the standards were not met. Obviously, the referees involved in the VAR, they were taken off of the game that they were supposed to be adjudicating next. They were also probably going to get some new training. All sort of stuff will happen. Howard Webb, who's in charge, is talking about them reevaluating the communications process and what that might mean for the future, because they realize there's some significant errors here. And I want to go through a couple of things that are important. One, there are some people complaining that they didn't see any VAR lines on the screen. We don't necessarily need to see VAR lines on the screen, because the professional guys are in the room. You're not seeing really VAR lines anymore, even if you watch like the UEFA Champions League. It's not particularly important to me as long as they release some kind of a thing in relatively quick succession. Now, I hope this full review that they're going to do obviously will focus a lot on the communication of how you communicate what happens in the VAR room and to the on-field official. Because there are some interesting things on the audio that I wanted to point out to if you get a chance to listen. the guy in charge of communicating the decision back recognized that there was an error. And at some point, they were trying to stop the game. So he's trying to tell, I think, the VAR official, maybe inside the stadium, or to halt the game. Now, the problem is you can't. Once you've restarted the game, that's it. And so quickly after that, I think Tottenham had executed a free kick. The game is on. You can't now stop the game according to the current laws of the game. So maybe there needs to be some change there, some wiggle room, or maybe a few more seconds it might take to make sure the correct decisions are made. So that's one thing. I have a better solution. I think everybody's been talking about it, but we'll get to that as well. There's also some questionable things in terms of allowing referees to be freelancing around the world. I'm not quite sure this may have made a significant impact, but when you have a massive error like this, questions come into play. So what happened? Darren England and Dan Cook both officiated a match in the Middle East on Thursday. And then they flew back on an eight-hour trip. I suspect they were in business class, so it's probably not that significant as how some people are making it out. And they were in the VAR room to officiate the Liverpool-Tottenham game, right? So this was something that was sanctioned by Webb, who is in charge of the PGMOL, right? So this visit to go adjudicate a match in the UAE was something that they thought was reasonable. I actually don't know how they traveled back. I suspect it has to be business class. And so you imagine relaxing conditions, they sleep, they're back. But when you have a kerfuffle of this nature, we have a lot of questions. And so that's one thing that maybe they need to take into consideration, particularly when you think about the level of the league. The Premier League is one of the major leagues in the world. When you think about the top 5-6 leagues in the world, they're always up there rivaling for number 1 or 2 position or 3, doesn't matter. There's a big league, high stakes, the most watched league across the world. Their marketing plan is great. It's in TV screens everywhere, or streaming devices now. And you can't tell me that those guys aren't well paid. And so why is it that they are hopping and skipping around the world? We know players go off and play and come back for the national team. And so maybe I'm overthinking this, but for something that requires heavy concentration, you just didn't think this would have happened, right? So maybe they have to think about how quickly you get back into the VAR room or officiate a game after traveling a significant amount of hours or distance. That's something that you probably have to look into. However, in my estimation, all of that is immaterial. Maybe not immaterial, but it points to something that I'm still confused about, and at the time of this recording, I haven't gotten full explanation from different journalists about the role of semi-automated offside technology, SAOT. Something that we saw at the World Cup in Qatar, and something that's worked and is working, because it's being used also in the Champions League, very effectively. I have a video about this on the channel before FIFA launched it at the World Cup. It's something that they tested for a number of years, and they felt very confident in utilizing it. And so, for the life of me, I don't understand why the Premier League clubs rejected the use of it for the 2023-2024 season. Is it a financial thing? Because obviously, utilizing things like semi-automated offside technology will require more cameras. It will require certain setup. I'm not quite sure if all of that cost is something that the owners have to to bear. I suspect they have to pay for it in some capacity. But something like this, the adoption of this, like what happened at the 2022 World Cup, would virtually ensure that there's no issues, right? Except that someone has to still communicate to the referee on field that it's a goal or not a goal. So if you communicate the wrong thing, then that might be a problem. But I definitely think that right now there is a need for this to be implemented ASAP. Semi-automated offside technology is fantastic in the sense that it uses algorithmic technology, innovation, along with a lot of processing to actually to process a lot of camera data that's tracking all of these players at a number of camera shots are being taken of players per second, every minute, to actually know exactly where they are on the pitch. The pitch is built in, the lines are automatically drawn. There's no need to really check it. It could actually be automated offside technology, but I think FIFA still wants a human to actually make the call. That was the reason the head of FIFA technology said last year why they're calling it semi, because they still want enough places attached to different players. It's easy to figure out what's going on. You actually know in matter of seconds, very quick, if a player is offside or not. And as in the World Cup as well, they had a connected ball, and so there's a lot of data going there. They know actually when the ball has been kicked, the point at which the player was on the field. So, because part of that too is when you're thinking about offside, you have to think about when was the ball kicked and the positions of the receiving player, the position of the receiving player in terms of proximity to the to the last defender. And so all of that is taken care of once the technology is in place, and it's very accurate. It's not making mistakes. And so if someone can explain to me why that's not in what some people like to call the biggest league in the world, we can argue about that. But it certainly pays a lot. The fanfare, the spectacle, the international spectacle, it has to be there. And so they need to get this right. Part of me wonders if we had semi-automated offside technology, if this would still have been a problem, because someone had to communicate that the player was onside, which they realized he was onside, but they were conferring a decision of offside on the field. So therefore, the communications process that they're talking about that needs to be revamped to make it clear is necessary. But I think to be sure, to make sure that drawings of lines aren't incorrect and people are making mistakes, it's time to implement semi-automated offside technology. You do this and things are much better when it comes to that. I don't think VAR is a problem in this capacity. I think offside is yes or no, and that's something like goal line technology, the ball crosses the line or it didn't, is relatively uncontroversial for me. We can discuss the role of the video assistant referee for other things on the field and whether or not you want that. But I really think those are things that we can really solve on that level. And it's unfortunate. I don't think Liverpool, they're upset. They're, launching all sort of inquiries demanding the release of things, and they're really upset. I think Jurgen Klopp was saying something to the effect of they should replay the game. I mean, maybe that's a bit too far because other teams have suffered, Manchester United, others, at the hands of probably mistakes from the VAR. And so I'm not quite sure we have to get down to that line, but clearly this was problematic. It's some people are calling it the biggest mistake since the introduction of VAR. We don't know. Diaz goal, should have been counted. They have to fix it. And I suspect they will. But that's, you start the week, it takes up a lot of the airspace. But I think at the end, communication has to be better. But this, no doubt, is a human error thing. But also, make sure you introduce semi-automated offside technology. I want to see the connected ball. I want to see everything. It's fantastic. You get 3D images when it's done. You can put that image in the stadium as well in relatively quick succession. No problem. It worked at the World Cup. It can work everywhere. All right. So that's what I want to see happen, and I suspect it will. But you let me know your thoughts on this. If you agree with me, some people are saying it's time for VAR to go. That might be a little bit too far. I mean, they're like, VAR has been a massive problem. I think sometimes that's an overreaction. This was more of a human error than a technological failure. Obviously, it involved the video assistant referees, but yeah, fix that. All right. So that's where it is. That's probably the biggest refereeing crisis, the biggest story in football this week. It's doing the airways everywhere. And yeah, but I want to continue and stay on the topic of football and talk about what's can only be described as a dreadful start to the season for the giant club Manchester United. This is 6 defeats in 10 for Manchester United, 2 defeats in a row in the UEFA Champions League. That's three on the bounce probably in defeats, right? Is it 3 on the bounce? And is it? Yeah, it's not 3, but I think, yeah, because they had played a game against Crystal Palace, they lost that. Yeah, now they're in Europe. This is a bad start to them for the season, right? 6 losses in 10 games is unacceptable. So what we're seeing is a continuation of defeats, struggles in Europe. I mean, you have to give credit to Galatasaray, the Turkish outfit. These guys win in England for what? It's the first time in 17 years. But the deteriorating performances of Manchester United it continues. It's just unconscionable. I have to use that. I've said it on even last podcast that we did. We talked about this. But what's happening is that it's really emphasizing the kind of internal struggles that exist at the club. And the ownership. So a number of things happen. If we were to just isolate the game, we can see some real failures there in terms of mistakes that led to the loss. You think about the loss that happened to Bayern Munich, in Munich against Bayern. You think about how they lost the game to Palace after beating them earlier in the week in the Carabao Cup. And so there's some on-the-field decision-making and some switching off that you don't expect from a club of Manchester United, for a club like Manchester United, and certainly not a club that's coached by Erik ten Hag. Especially what we know about him is attention to detail, the way in which he wants to play. And so it's shocking. I'm going to go through some of this again. But the thing that I want to say, and I've been saying it, I think until we get rid of those Glazers, until the Glazers decide to sell the club, which is just drawn out in ridiculous ways. Today we saw more things about a new structuring by a new deal structure by Jim Ratcliffe. We haven't heard from the Qataris in a while. We don't really know anything what the Glazers are doing. Are they wanting to sell? Their valuation is different. It's just a real right mess. And a lot of the things that even the club might be doing right, it will take a very long time because so much has gone wrong since the Sir Alex Ferguson years. And some of these things will just not improve. And it's a massive club. I mean, anything, somebody breaks a nail, it's probably headline story. And this year in particular, there's a lot of a media circus and a lot of excess noise attached to things for the club, only because the management of it hasn't been done well. We've, the Greenwood case in particular. What may happen with Anthony? I mean, it comes on after that too. So some of those things may not be the club itself in terms of, those are players that got into some interesting legal wrongdoings or legal problems in some ways. But the way in which they handle these things too is problematic, especially in the case of Greenwood. But we're at a moment where everything is going wrong because the injuries are just stacking up. And here you have a manager that has to put out a team that is not even close to anything that is his best team. He's also having internal disputes with Jadon Sancho. We don't know what's going on there in terms of whether he will ever play for the club again. Probably not likely if Ten Hag is still the manager. Then you have loss of form from some of your stalwarts. Last season's top goal scorer, Marcus Rashford, isn't playing at the same level as he was last year. Not quite sure why. And so that's a problem and then you think about all the injuries. So it's bad. I mean, yesterday's game alone against Galatasaray, you could think about defensive lapses. Ten Hag himself criticized the way in which they allowed some of these goals. But it just start to look from the struggles before, and you realize that it's just a continuation, and you start to question whether or not they're actually playing for him, if he's losing the dressing room, and we get to that. I'm not quite sure he has, but they're not responding, and they're not responding, and the players are not responding in a way you would anticipate. And then he buys this excellent goalkeeper, and I'm starting by saying that because I think Onana is an excellent goalkeeper, and he can morph into whatever they want him to be. But he's had some big nights where he's made some major mistakes. In the Bayern game, against Galatasaray, some of his errors contributed to the defeat. I mean, perhaps the only bright spot from the Galatasaray game was the way in which, Rasmus Højlund took over Old Trafford in a way, right? He was, a new striker, very young, scoring twice. That's probably the only bright spark. Everything else is just, you don't even know what to say. I mean, it's not acceptable. And a lot of things need to be done. It's a challenging way ahead for Manchester United. The chances of progressing to the round of 16 in the Champions League is very difficult as it seems right now, right? I mean, this is the kind of worst start since 1966-67 when you think about the European competition, right? There's all of these massive all-time things happening in the decline. And now the scrutiny is on Ten Hag. I think he has to shoulder a lot of blame for some of the ways they've been playing. But I don't think he should be changed, or they should not be thinking that way. If the Glazers are thinking that way, then you know this. This is even more proof they have no interest at the club. They don't think about the club and its viability. Ten Hag needs to be back for a very long time. He has to perform that kind of transformation. We see that there's a new overhaul of the recruiting system. I mean, a lot of the players that are coming in are players that he wants, and nothing is wrong with that. But at some point, when you think about these big clubs and the tenure in which managers stay now, you really need a structure, a proper sporting director, proper recruiting system, and a philosophy of play that you can start to stack up on players that when a new manager comes in, you're actually identifying the kind of manager to get the best out of the way in which you play. So that way they won't come in and say, well, you got 10 players, they got to go because they don't fit the way I play. Right? So you don't get it. You cannot afford to be continuing to repeat a scenario where Louis van Gaal comes in, he gets all the players he wants. Jose Mourinho comes in, he's like, I don't like those type of players. I need to buy another set of players. And it's just like a circus. So there is managerial concerns. Ten Hag got booed. He's got fan reaction is one of disapproval. I still think that most people still have many fans of the club still supports Ten Hag, and they can see where he's going. You get the statements, all the rumblings. Journalists are saying that, the board is behind Ten Hag, and you hope, right? So, in a way, you can see what he wants to do, but I think all of this is problematic because you have 12 or more players out, the likes of a Shaw, the likes of Lisandro Martinez, who's probably going to be out for much longer now. Your left back that you brought into to backup loan is out. Your backup left back in Malacia is out. I mean, there's just like injury crisis across the field. And then players you bought in took time to bed in as well. So it's trouble, right? I mean, injuries to key players really exacerbating the position of the club, and it could get worse, but you have to stop it. This is what Ten Hag needs to do. He has to arrest this decline. So maybe the way in which he wants to play, he has to change that in the short term until he can get players back. That's what he has to do. I know he likes to play in a particular way, control the game, playing out from the back, all of that stuff. He has a philosophy which, if done well, is exciting and can dominate a lot of games. But he came in to fight culture. He has to change the culture. He's been doing so much. And then he had a really good season last year. Excellent season. 2 finals. And in a way, he could have probably done better, but he wasn't backed in the January transfer market after Cristiano Ronaldo left. And which suggests, or just not suggests, but it further shows the type of owners of the club. And this season has just not gone well. But he has to figure out how to just put a big band-aid on this and get some wins. You have to stop losing. And then hopefully people can come in. Hopefully you can get to a January transfer market and maybe bolster the squad in some interesting ways. It's very difficult to get the kind of players you want in January. But that's what he has to do. But it's a challenging path ahead. When you looked at the set of matches that were coming up, the back-to-back against Crystal Palace, you saw, well, both of those are winnable games. You would back yourself to beat Galatasaray at home at Old Trafford. And so on and on, you look at these things and you're like, yeah, he's going to get a break. He could manage this out and hopefully doesn't lose anybody. And then yesterday you end up with a bunch of interesting things, the likes of a Casemiro picking up not a red card, a player that is so experienced, a goalkeeper giving away things, off nights for players. I mean, it's just difficult. But I will end by saying on the Manchester United thing is that you have to support Ten Hag. I mean, if he's losing the dressing room, he has to retake that And the club has to support him to suggest that the manager is the most important thing and you guys don't get to dictate this. You have to create a good culture in the dressing room. I'm not sure if many of you have been following. You've started to see, I think there's a new David Beckham Netflix thing coming out, and I think he was on a podcast with Gary Neville, Ian Wright, Jamie Carragher, Roy Keane, and I forgot the name of the woman that's on the podcast too. But one of the things they keep talking about, and Roy used to say this a lot, and even Gary Neville talks about, is the culture of the dressing room and what kind of standards you're setting. You need to have that. Everybody needs to get together and play hard and work hard. That is standard for any kind of successful team. And the Jadon Sancho thing is a defining moment too, because clearly he and Ten Hag are not on the same page. They're upset. And it's clear that Ten Hag had tried to work with him earlier, especially when he went off to the Netherlands and then he came back in the team, and now it's a mess. And it doesn't seem as if Sancho has any inclination to apologize and try to recommit himself and get back in the team, at least from what the reports we're hearing. What is he doing? Is he trying to wait it out to see if Ten Hag will get fired? I mean, I put it to you, if that's what happens, if they get rid of Erik Ten Hag, which you could see happening because it's the Glazers, it's going to be even 10 more steps backward. They have to get this right. If they don't get it right with this manager and allow him to develop and fix this and reshape the club, it's a further 15 years behind the likes of a Manchester City. There's a need to get this right. All right, talking about getting right, I don't know if this is getting right. The latest story that came out today, and I'll end on this for this lovely podcast, is the awarding of the World Cup hosts for the 2030 World Cup, the Centennial World Cup. You know, FIFA decided in an interesting way to allow the likes of Morocco, Spain, and Portugal to host the World Cup, along with Uruguay, Argentina, and Paraguay. So it's the first time the World Cup will be held across 3 continents. Interesting, because I think there's a joint bid between Morocco, Spain, and Portugal. So you get the European thing, you get Morocco, a northern African country, and exciting place to bring the games. But also the question, and I think this was a major question for them, was what are you going to do to celebrate 100 years? You think about the first World Cup, 1930 Uruguay. You know, that time is a very small contingent of teams. So the World Cup has grown much bigger in spectacle and demands. And a country like Uruguay cannot host a World Cup. It's too small. And a lot of people thought about them along with Argentina hosting a World Cup. That made sense. But now what we're seeing is a historic moment where you'll get some games. I think FIFA is also going to do a bunch of celebratory things to build up in Argentina, in Uruguay, Argentina, and Paraguay. They'll host some of the games. And you'll also get some World Cup happening in Spain, Morocco, and Portugal. I mean, this is exciting. I mean, very exciting in some interesting ways. I mean, I'm thinking about it in different ways in terms of excitement. Because oftentimes what this will allow, I would think, is access to the World Cup, assuming that it's easier. If you're on one side of the world, you can probably get to some of the games. How are they going to award who gets quarterfinals and finals and so on? I guess I haven't seen that as yet, at least at the time of recording. But you'll get a sense of a big festival, right, across the world, and I think it can happen, right? I guess if it's staged right, and then you have a little break, you fly and you get to another side of the world. I mean, the flying today and the travel stuff is just amazing, and quite possibly all these big teams will be on a chartered flight themselves, flying the business class sections of these things, flatbeds. So I don't think in terms of rest and recuperation, and it's not going to be a big deal, I don't think. But I think it's really a historic moment, multi-continental hosting. Of course, the host countries will get an automatic bid into this World Cup, and as we've seen here, the World Cup has been expanded for the 2026 World Cup that's coming up in America. Who knows if it gets even bigger again, because I think FIFA is on the rise to expand the game to make more money, and that's what's going to happen. People might complain about the quality and so on, but excuse me, that's for another day. I think it's also interesting to think about what that might mean for legacy and infrastructure. So usually when you host a major competition, you got to improve on the infrastructure and so on. So I think that might improve some infrastructure, not only stadiums, but also transportation and accommodations and so on. Spreading around. A lot of people travel when it comes to the World Cup. So, tourism dollars and commerce and all that. So it should be good. I mean, obviously, this is not easy. It's a logistical nightmare. Well, maybe not a nightmare, but it could pose some logistical challenges, some security challenges. These are some things that you'd have to think through. But we're talking about a massive thing. The World Cup, outside of the Olympics, those are the two biggest things that we have. So it's important, there might be some complaints about all the travel and, the environmental connotations and what that means. Kind of carbon footprint might be there as well. But also I think it gives an impact to grow the game, to put it to make sure people recognize that it's the global game, so there's an appreciation that it can come everywhere. And it's also kind of creating a moment that is interesting, because it by hosting on a multiple country basis, as we're going to see also with the US, Canada, and Mexico, but those are massive countries. When you start to think about multiple countries hosting a World Cup, you realize that places that could never host a World Cup by themselves could also start to get into the mix. So that might be an interesting legacy to think about. But you let me know, are you excited for that? I know it's a little bit further away. I'm still thinking about the World Cup that's coming up in a few years, but in 3 years? But I'm very excited for this as well, and I think it would be a great opportunity, a great homage to Uruguay as well, where the World Cup all started. And yeah, it's going to be fantastic, and it's good to see Morocco in the mix. I mean, Spain, Portugal, big time football nations as well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Well, guys, this is what I wanted to say this evening. I want to thank you if you're here, at this point in time. I appreciate you. I want to encourage you to stick with me, encourage you to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and please put your comments, your thoughts, anything you want to say in the chat. It's been good having a discussion with you. I also have a number of different videos on the channel covering a number of different things, and I hope you take some time to check it out if you haven't before, and if you have, I appreciate you. So take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.